welcoming basically everyone. And then Lalitha, I hand it over to you.
Right. Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, Lalitha, you know what? I was so embarrassed when you corrected me the other day on Facebook, and I got my pronouns wrong about this very famous Indian woman. And I had to write her and apologize to her.
No, but since we are Indians, we know the name definitely means a lady. See, that's with
You know,
me.
she's fantastic. I just absolutely love her. I love her work.
That can happen to anyone because.
Well, you know, I should have did my homework on that one. Yeah. And, you know, it's this, you know, assumption that we make sometimes of, you know, of people. And I was looking at it and it was like, and it's always this group of, you know, men. And I just assumed she was also in this group, that she was also a man.
Because technical skills are not the prerogative of men, women. That's what Indian women like to say. Shall we start? Dolon, we should start.
I think, Lalitha, we should. Because people at the respective locations. And
yes,
since
another thing, you don't penalize people who are on time for the sake of those who are not on time. This has been always my policy when I take a session.
So I think
they can join us and when they like. If people are late, they can join us and when they like. I think we should start.
I agree with you, Lalitha. Okay, so let us begin. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a very special event for us today because it's our first hybrid event where we have Ron with us, and that's someone who's a real expert. He knows his job, so we are all looking forward to listening to Ron in conversation with Lalitha, who is a. There are 3 locations from which we have joined live. So some of us have the special privilege of now networking with each other in person, while we are able to open it up to everyone so that they can join online as well. We are also live on Facebook and YouTube for anyone who would like to just listen in. And this is the kind of event that we would also like to organize in the future. Now, for those who are new to BEC-Fi, let me share a little bit what we are about. We are a first of its kind platform that that is open to teachers, professors, trainers, professionals, anyone in the field of business communication who operates or is connected with India in any way. And we have our goals, we have our mission, our vision. One of the key things that we are interested in is addressing the gap that exists between academia and industry. We are aware that the dialogue between academia and industry is quite limited. And the purpose today is to try and bridge the gap when Ron talks to us about transversal skills today, how can transversal skills help students cope better with the workplace? That will be one approach that he's taking. And Lalitha will be asking questions, because while we hear Ron, who has an international exposure, international experience, we want people from India to understand, so how is it applicable in India itself? So I look forward to a very exciting afternoon. I'll welcome you all, and I hand it over to Lalitha to introduce Ron, to introduce the topic. Over to you, Lalitha.
Thank you, Dolon. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so privileged and happy to be a part of this fireside chat. First, the name transversal skills are new to many of us. We wonder what it means. It says transferable skills. So in what way is it more than say a soft skills, as we call it, or 21st century skills, etc., etc. I, for one, what I believe is transfer skill, as I understand, is transferable. So you can transfer these skills, not just at your workplace, even in your personal relationships. For example, communication. Communicating without being politely is useful in your work, definitely useful at home, so that you build your relationships with your children, teenagers, etc., etc. So I am really looking forward to what is the other in transversal skill, which doesn't include in the other skills which we know. And I don't want to stand between you and Ron. Let me tell you, I have known Ron for some time. And I've always been fascinated by his creativity, his willingness to tread the lesser known path. And I have personally used a number of his mind maps. And I find that he is the one who on Facebook always brings us to all the new things which he can find. For example, even last week, he got us into some new websites. He got what teachers to do. So I feel it's a privilege to have Ron in our group, and very, very excited to see what he's got to say. Because I'm very sure that it will be a learning experience for all of us. Every one of us will learn something and in that process grow. So without anything, I'm not going to introduce Ron because he's got there's so much to say about him. I'm going to let him introduce himself. I hand over to Ron. Ron, the platform is all yours.
Thank you. And thank you all for inviting me here today. I was really excited about doing this. It did pose a little challenge to me because it, made me reflect on what I do, how I do it, and how did I get there? I think those are some things that I had to think about in putting this little, fireside chat together. So I'd like to start, which normally I don't, but I'd like to start with just, how did I get there? And, what am I going to share with you today? So I'm going to share screens with you. And here, what you're, wait a minute, I think I shared the wrong screen. Okay, one more time, let me get over there. It's this screen. There we go. That's the one we want. Well, as I said, thank you for inviting me to the fireside chat. And I'd like to just tell you a little bit about myself, okay? Because I think that has a lot to do with what we're going to talk about today. I didn't come to be where I'm at overnight. It didn't happen by osmosis. I started my career very early. I worked in New York. I was doing my master's, my MBA there, and I was working for a company in London, Debenhams International, which was headquartered in London. And I was working for their New York office, but I also worked in San Francisco, Hong Kong, Buenos Aires, and Mexico City. I do speak 3 languages fluently. English is my mother language. But I do speak Spanish and German. So those language skills took me all over the world. But what was I really doing for Debenhams? That's where the journey starts into my discovery of transversal skills. Well, I started as a trainee in the Human Resource Management Department, and later moved to the Human Resource Development Department within Debenhams. Traveled all over the world for them, developing assessment centers for the people that we would be hiring. So that was the beginning of my journey. But that journey took me to Germany, where I worked on a project for the Franz Haniel Academy, which is one of the first private corporate universities in Germany. And I had privileged working in that team to develop their corporate management training program. Well, that led me into the world of academia, which I started in Germany at the European Business College. And there I started to see the differences between what is a language trainer and a communications trainer. That was a nice journey, but that led me to something else, a little bit more detailed, and moved to the Cologne Business School, where I was working to develop students, helping them to prepare for their entry into the job world. I was working with several consultancies at the time because of my human resource development experience, and our goal was to get students prepared for the real world. And we did that by preparing them for assessment centers. And a lot of what I'll talk about today was that experience about assessment centers. And that moved me on to the International School of Management, which is one of the largest private business schools in Germany, and worked there in my first job, not just in academia, but I was the liaison between private industry and the university. And I was the director of the Office of Development, which was responsible for developing relationships with private industry, getting to know what private industry was really looking for in job candidates, and then help the university to develop programs in the way of assessment centers to prepare students for that. Well, that led me to another job, which was the University of South Westphalia here in Germany of Applied Sciences, where I worked with engineers for 14 years. And that was also a fantastic journey and has something to do with a question that I will be asked about later. And I'll tell you what that answer to that question is and how that's connected to my 14 years of experience of working with engineering students at a University of Applied Science. I now presently work at the University Duisburg-Essen in the personnel department, and I am an adjunct professor there at the university and responsible for the program and the development of the program, which is the planning, implementation, and assessment of the EMI program, which is English as a medium of instruction, to help professors and PhD students better their English language speaking skills to be able to either teach in English or to present at conferences throughout the world. So that's sort of my background there. But my journey also led me from just being a general English teacher to business English, to English for special purposes for engineers, and also English as a medium of instruction, English as a medium of communication, and also international communication from the perspective of English lingua franca for business. And I was always asking myself along this journey to, be clear about what I was doing. I always asked myself questions. Of course, coming from private industry and moving into academia, I always was led by the question, what are companies looking for in employees? And what are the jobs of the future? And how do companies work internally? Because that's important to know if you're going to be working with business students, engineering students, and knowing how organizations work and taking an organizational approach to how you train and teach communications. And what do companies do to develop their employees? That's also important to know. And future-proofing a career before graduation. What were we as organizations and institutions, academia, what were we doing to prepare those students before they graduated? What programs did we have? And then I was thrown into something that was very new for me, but very early in my career, and that was, what is the difference between socioeconomic background of a student and the social capital that they bring to the table? How does that really affect their future proofing and their education? This was also important. And how do we as universities fill in those blanks? And what are we doing to fill in the blanks? And what connections does a university have to private industry? These are the things that I thought about in preparing for this chat today. And there's just one more thing I want to add before we get started, is I wanted to quote somebody who is from the London Business School. And she, put it into words that, I was searching for something about how do I put all of that together for today's chat. And the interview that I'll be participating in, this fireside chat. And, there were 5 forces when we look at what really is going on in the world. We have the force of technology. This is very important, how we are working with that and integrating that into the way we teach and the way we learn. And of course, globalization. We can see from current international events that things are changing very quickly, and we've got to really look at those different factors when we are preparing our students in the learning process at universities or inside of corporations. We also have to deal with demography, okay, and that's also another important factor. And of course, how society is changing, and it's changing very quickly. And the last thing, which we are all, of course, being forced to look at, is energy and all these things, and how that's connected to also engineering students. So those are all the things that brought me to the point today to discuss this with you all in this fireside chat. And I thought maybe you needed to have just a little bit of background before we get started. So I'm going to turn that over to you, Lalitha, and let's get started with this fireside chat.
Thank you, Ron. My first question, I think this is what will interest most people. Exactly what are transversal skills? And how do they differ from the soft skills, 20th century skills, etc.? And or is just old wine in new bottles? Are we just churning out different names? Or is there something more to transversal skills? What do you think?
Well, I want to start by answering that question by separating something that we as educators, people working in schools, already, primary schools, secondary schools, preparatory schools, vocational schools, and maybe even universities. We use the term as educators, 20th century skills. But I can tell you, in private industry, they don't use that term. Okay, that's a term we as academics and we as educators use because we've been, force-fed that this is what we need to do, and we need to prepare students with 20th century skills. But when you look at a job ad, something in the newspaper or online, nowhere have I ever seen as one of the requirements to getting a job 20th century skills, okay, or 21st century skills. Yeah, we don't see that. We really see a list of skills, okay, and those list of skills are transversal skills. So let's look at the word transversal. Okay, what does that mean, and the difference between transversal skills and soft skills? Is it just another trendy name? It's not. Okay, it's not. I think transversal skills goes beyond soft skills, and we're going to look at that. But if you just look at the word transversal, it's the word trans and the word versal, okay? And I think if trans means extending across, through something, and versal comes from the short of universal. So, things that are universal, that go beyond soft skills. So this is why we use the term in private industry, transferable skills. Some people use that term, or transversal skills. And I just prefer the word transversal skills because there's a lot of research done on that. So that's how I use that. But we do use the term transferable and transversal interchangeably. But I think your question's about what's the difference of these two things. And here, I'm just going to share screens again with you on this right here. And I just want to start with something sort of easy, okay? When we can look at hard skills and soft skills, okay? And these are just some examples, okay, of some hard skills like foreign language, okay? Language is important, and language can be tested, and we can see if people speak a language and how good they are in a language. We can look at coding ability, technical understanding within a job, engineering or whatever it is. And, these are just some writing proficiency. We can see that when someone sends an application to me, I can see how they write. And I'm be honest with you, I've had teachers. I was the owner of 5 language schools in 3 different countries. And I have to say that I've had many English teachers send resumes to me who had terrible writing skills. And of course, just the resume alone eliminated them from even coming close to an interview, because I could already assess those things. Now, soft skills are, things like empathy, and this is just a short list. I'll show a more extended list. Communication, leadership, willingness to learn. Willingness to learn is extremely important. And time management. Okay, so these are just some examples right there. But we're talking about transversal skills. And so, we go beyond that. Okay, we go on beyond this, short list to things like critical and innovative thinking, interpersonal skills, intrapersonal skills, global citizenship, media and information literacy, and of course, other things like physical health and religious values. Now, that might seem, the last one there, physical health, the psychological health, and religious values, as why is that on that list? It is important. That comes to another thing that we'll discuss. So here, let me just show you that these things can be assessed. And these are just a list of things, of transversal skills, which are tested at assessment centers. And because I've been doing this for so many years, here's so many things that I can test. And another thing between, things, it's how are these things tested? This is a challenge for communication trainers, because communication trainers need to know how assessment centers work, what happens at an assessment center, and how can we prepare our students to be ready to show that they have these transversal skills in order to enter the job market or apply for a promotion within a company. So these are important things. And again, I will give a copy of this PowerPoint to the people who are attending today. Okay. So I hope that answers that first question.
Yes, that brings me, thanks, Ron. That brings me directly to the second question. The second question is, how can we develop and assess and develop these skills? Mainly because in India, there are large numbers. Not everyone can afford to take up assessments. Assessments are very expensive. And we have people who don't know and then lack confidence when they come to interviews. Do I have all these skills which I have? So how do you think we can assess and train in large scales in India? I mean, this is, I'm taking a particular to an Indian scenario. You have assessment centers. I know most European countries, abroad, Western countries, but a country like India, where there's a huge number of people. So, and of course, we cannot expect you to give the answer. What I'm more interested is, how can we help our teachers and the trainers who are attending today? How can they learn to assess these? Because I feel that each skill has a different measure. I mean,
Mhm.
how do you assess is slightly different for each of the skills? Don't you think?
Well, yeah, there is, okay, there is a difference. But that goes back to how do we see ourselves as trainers, as teachers? Are we just a language teacher? And I have to say that there is a difference between a language teacher and a communications trainer. These
Yes.
are two different people. What a language teacher brings to the table is important. Let us not forget that, when you're teaching language has a lot to do with mechanics, grammar, semantics, pronunciation, those type of things that, linguistics, many, many different things that a good, well-trained language teacher should bring to the table. But what makes the difference between a language trainer and a communications trainer? This is where we get into some gray areas. Well, I think that a good, business communications trainer should bring good language skills to the table, which does mean that they probably started as a language teacher or, or maybe have a high proficiency level within the language. I do believe that a good business communications trainer in English, doesn't have to be in English, it could be in Spanish. I do it in Spanish, I do it in German. And I have grammar problems in German and Spanish, but not to the point where I cannot give a good training. So I'm not, but I speak all of them like mother languages. Good, well-developed business communication trainers know or seek to know what happens inside of a company. They know what a company is doing. They know how companies operate. They know what people need to know to have success in those companies. They understand the organizational perspective of a company. And I always say, give me, when I hire or look for business communication trainers, I put them through an assessment center. They're just not going to get that job just because they tell me they're a native speaker or they speak like a native speaker, because being a native speaker is not a qualification to be a good business communications trainer. And I'm getting to answering your question. What do we as communication trainers have to do to, teach this? Well, if you don't have business experience, if you've never worked in private industry, there's going to be a gap there that has to be filled in. And again, what happens at companies? Get with people who are specialists. If you're teaching engineering students as a business communication trainer, find out what engineering companies do. How are they put together? What are the different parts of that company? What are those sections, areas of specialty within the company? This will help you to become a better business communication trainer if you're just working with engineering students, which I did for 14 years. I'm not an engineer. And my students taught me a lot about engineering. But after 14 years, I still stayed with what I do, even though I find engineering fascinating. So I had to get what's called a SME. SME is an acronym for SME, which means a subject matter expert. I don't know anything about building bridges, and I don't know anything about, all these other things that engineers have to do. But what I did so that I could become a good business communication trainer at the university was I took an interdisciplinary approach. I went and sat and talked to the professors who were teaching these classes. They told me what they were teaching. And one question I always asked each professor that I was working with is, can you tell me 10 important things that your students need to know to pass your class? And they would tell me, and I would collect all of those because that helped me to create content for the business communication classes that I was teaching. Don't waste your time doing research on the internet. Get with the SMEs, let them tell you in a nice, wonderful, conversation over a cup of coffee. They're going to be glad to give you that information, and that will help you to really put together some great classes that are interactive and help these students to develop their skills that they will need to enter the job market.
Thank you, Ron. I understand what you're saying. That's what we talk about: customization, creating a needs analysis, finding out what the students do. And I think a lot of colleges in India do that. They have placement officers who interact with the industry and find out exactly what the industry is looking for before they train. I think that leads me to the next question, that in India, there's what they call industry and academy divide. The sense is the people who are working as professors in colleges are not really up to date. One thing you said is true, that they have to get to understand. How would you bridge the gap? How can you train them so that they become ready for training students who are going to look for jobs? That is.
Well, that is a multifaceted question. Actually, has a lot of answers. But I'm going to start with what my personal journey was, because I want to use myself, as an example. But I think that has proven to be true, is that when you ask the question, how can we train communication trainers to, do this, work with students to develop their transversal skills, the first thing that comes to mind is willingness. They've got to be willing to want to learn. And what is one of the skills that's tested as, at an assessment center? Learning. Okay. So when you are a trainer or a teacher, you've got to be willing to learn and learn new things. And there's so many places to go to learn. Your organization is one of them. There's, this, personal professional learning network. We need that as teachers. We need to be connected. We need that as trainers. We need to be connected to other people who are doing the same thing, who share their experience with one another and help to develop one another so that we can all be good in our jobs. So willingness to want to learn, willingness to become a member, a participant in a professional learning network. And another aspect is an open mind. You've got to be open to all the new things that are going to be thrown at you. And you've always had to question is how do you integrate those things that you're learning into what you're doing? So that's another thing, open-mindedness. But just because you go to groups and you're a member of a personal learning network doesn't mean that just sitting there and that all of that, that stuff you're taking in is just automatically by osmosis going to be in your brain and you're just going to know it. You got to get out there and try doing it. And you're going to make some mistakes along the way. But you definitely have to take risk in what you're learning and apply it. And, in your personal learning network, exchange your experience of what you've tried with someone else and get some feedback from people about, what you're doing. What do you do it? How do you do it? We need that also. We need other people around us to learn how to be a good business communication trainer. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a learning process. And that learning process can be self-directed. With me, I was very self-directed. I'm a I'm an autodidactic. I love learning because I know I'm developing myself and I want to do a good job. I take my job seriously, and I want to know, for me, the most important thing is when I get feedback from my students and saying, God, that's wonderful. Thank you for teaching that to us. Thank you for letting us do this. I really feel good about myself. That's some of the best feedback you can get, that you know you're helping your students to prepare for their entry into the work world. So there's the list is long, but I think those are some of the important things of how we can develop ourselves to help our students.
Thank you, Ron, and that's been very interesting. There's one question which I left out. What's the difference between a skill and competence? When you look at the UNESCO report, they talk of competences, but are they interchangeable? Are these terms interchangeable, or do they have different meanings?
They do have different meanings. They are different. Now let's look at a skill. And I'm just going to keep this basic. A skill is something that I can learn. It's something learnable. And just because it's learnable doesn't mean that everyone who tries to learn it is going to learn it or perfect it. We can learn a software program like Microsoft Office and say that we're good at Microsoft Office. And then we go to an assessment center and they give us an task at an assessment center where we're going to have to use our skills with PowerPoint, Excel, and Word to complete the task. There it can be tested. So the skill that we have of Microsoft Office program, we can say that we have that at a high level on a resume. Anyone can say that, but it can be tested to see if they have it. And once we can, that's one way it's doing. But a competency is different. A competency is something that has to do with behavior, how I behave, how my attitude towards things. And when we look at the list of things that are tested at an assessment center, like decision making is a competency, but it can be learned. It's a skill. So we can learn it as a skill, but it can be tested and we can see their behavior. So the difference between a skill and a competency is usually attitude and behavior that can be observed and not just sitting at a computer doing Excel, okay, but solving problems, okay, because usually at an assessment center, they'll give you a problem which requires the skill. And so with the competency, I can see how creative you are. I can see your behavior of creativity. I can see how you communicate. We can learn communication skills, but communication skills is also a competency. I can give you a task at an assessment center and say, you have 30 minutes to prepare a presentation. And of course, they do their research. They'll, great with PowerPoint. But when they stand up and give that presentation, we're going to see their communication skills.
Yes.
So then it becomes a competency.
Right. So I've understood. So you mean to say that when you keep practicing, a skill can be a competency. When you learn, it's a skill, and with practice and with what you have, it becomes a competency. I suppose that's.
But let me give you another example, okay? And I need to say two things there. One of them, and it has to do with deliberate practice. A lot of people say that they're coaches and that they're going to coach you. And if you go through my coaching, you're going to become really good with language coaching or whatever. Well, I play a musical instrument. And I think that's a good analogy, is picking up a trumpet. I play brass instruments. I'm not saying that I'm great, okay? And I also sing. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to become an opera singer, okay? Because that's not my goal. But with a musical instrument, you've got to pick it up and you've got to practice. You've got to practice, practice, practice. And if your goal is to be a musician in an orchestra or a symphony, well, you're going to have to become great. And that's going to be a lot of learning along the way and a lot of practice. But how do I know that I'm good? Well, if I'm accepted, as a member of a symphony, I think I'm pretty good. Yeah, because I've proven that. They've seen that I have that skill and competency.
Right.
But there is one more thing I need to add that is deliberate practice. And for those of you here today listening, I want you to please Google the term deliberate practice, because this is not something I'm making up. There's a lot of research into that. And that is important to know what deliberate practice is if you're a business communication trainer, because that has a lot to do with perfecting a skill, no matter what it is. And you have to know how that works, because deliberate practice is part of how I teach, how I train, and how I coach. And getting people to repeat things. And sometimes deliberate practice can be boring, but if a person's goal is to get good at something and be great at it, you need deliberate practice. And we as business communication trainers need to know what that is.
Thank you, Ron. This is my last question to you today. Then we'll ask the audience to share their questions. Mm-hmm. The question is, what is the difference between preparing university students for the workplace and training employees in an organization? I mean, what are the approaches, the methodology? We are all training them in transversal skill, assessing transversal skills, but how do you go about training university students who have not yet taken up a job and those who are already in the workplace and they have to be further trained?
Well, we have to look at, let's take a step back with that. How does learning work when you're already in the workplace? Okay, you got to know that. Okay, how do companies train their employees, and what are they using as a basis to create these trainings? You need to do some research on that, and then what are we as academics doing to prepare people to enter the work world? And where are those gaps? Where are those gaps there? That's like benchmarking that, okay? What are the lessons learned? What are the best practices there? We learn from that. Now, coming from private industry, I knew I could see the gaps already when I entered the academic world. I knew what was missing. But the academic world works very differently than the private corporate world. There's a big difference there. And, making connections there is not always easy. But what we need to do as business communication trainers within academia or language trainers, and I have to say, again, there is a difference between the two, is, again, find out how training works in a company, and find out how you're doing training and fill in the gaps. That's going to help you. Okay?
Probably.
But how training works and teaching works when it comes to business, students or engineering students. And this was a discovery that I made. And this is why at the university, when I was working with engineering students, I could see what the gaps were, but making the transition was not easy because we had called those classes business English. And we realized we were teaching the wrong thing. Okay. So we kept the business English classes as language classes, and we created another department, and we called it International Business Communications. And we hired different people for that.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you very much.
Things to the table.
I mean, now we have just about 10-15 minutes left. So I want to throw it open to the participants to ask their questions. What are the questions? It was very enlightening. I thought you covered a whole lot of subject and a whole lot of things. At least it has made me curious to know more about how the other portion, what you call the other of transversal skills, also how do you train so many people, how do you, last time when we spoke, we talked about the social capital, etc. But right now, I think we need to give the participants a chance to ask questions. Anyone, I hope, I know we haven't touched the whole thing, but we have scratched the surface. So let's find out from the participants what they would like to ask. Pune, any questions? Jayashree, you could straight away ask the questions. Or Dolon. Dolon, any one of you, Kolkata, anybody ready with the questions? I've got the chat and I haven't got any questions right here.
Well, I would like to add something that I think I forgot there, and that is, there is a difference between corporate training and training in academia. And, you're working with university students who have never worked. So they don't bring any experience to the table. So a lot of it can, be very theoretical. But you need a good, experienced, business communications trainer who has that connection to or experience to private industry and knows how it does work. Now, when we're in corporate training, your participant is different because they do have work experience and they bring that experience to the table. So you got to use that experience, and that's what makes the difference. The key word there is experience. We've got a lot of experience in the corporate world, people, bringing their experience and you using that to create training, whereas the academic student doesn't have that. So we've got to fill in a lot of blanks for them. And I think one of the ways that I did it was when I was at the university and working at the International School of Business. One way I did that was I worked with a lot of professors, saw what they were doing. I took that interdisciplinary approach and did a class called case studies. Okay, the university let me do that. And so that was wonderful. That's one way we as business communication trainers can teach these skills is through case studies. Use Harvard University case studies. They're the best.
There's a very interesting question here, Ron. That is, how do assessment centers guard against cross-cultural biases or misunderstanding when assessing transversal skills of people?
I love that question. Okay, I love that question because, well, first of all, we got to break that question down there a little bit because we're first of all dealing with cross-cultural, right, competence as a competence, okay? And bias is something different, okay? But first, just cross-cultural, intercultural, and we can train that. We can teach that at a university, and we did, okay? But biases that can also be checked. When you're working with case studies, you can see, because one of the things that's tested at an assessment center. One of the in-tray tasks is they'll give you a case study. Now, usually they'll give you the case study 2 days before or 3 days before, so you have some time to work it out. But it's your answer to the problem that we will be able to identify if you do or you do not have biases, depending on how you deliver your solution to the case study. So that is one way they deal with them, is give you a case study. Let's see what your solution is going to be to the problems presented in the case study. And through listening to your presentation of your solution, we'll be able, through some questioning, and good assessment centers always have 3 or 4 people who are there, making decisions as to whether that person has a bias or not. We're able to see that, or also check for a misunderstanding.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yes. Thank you, Ron. Thank you. I think that was very interesting. That Jayashree or anyone, please come in. Yeah, yes.
Jayashree. The team from Pune would like to get some workshops which you could suggest, Ron, for the trainers. You had just mentioned certain workshops informally in the beginning. That's one question. And the other one, could you just specify certain assessment methods which we as trainers could follow?
So there are 2 questions. Could you suggest workshops?
Yes.
For for teachers to train themselves, upskill themselves. And second, the second was, what was the second one?
Assessment methods.
And the assessment method. I think it's
Well,
different for different
she's
skills.
she's asking 3 questions, and I have the answer for you. I think I can break that down.
Yeah.
Is first of all, I think that we as trainers, even teachers, okay, language teachers, but I'm directing my answer to business communication trainers. And another thing that does make a very good business communication trainer is their ability to work with an array, a big palette of methodologies. This is extremely important. How do they work with all the PBLs of problem-based learning, project-based learning, and performance-based learning, place-based learning. They've got to know these methodologies. Good trainers know those methodologies and use and integrate those methodologies to how they teach and train. And of course, another important methodology is task-based learning. I meet many language teachers who don't know the difference between an activity and a task, and they tell me they're doing task-based learning, but they're actually just doing simple activities, one right after the other, thinking that this is going to help to develop the students. And in a way, that's okay, but that's not task-based learning. Okay, so you got to know what task-based learning is, and problem-based learning and project-based learning. These are some. But if you're teaching those methodologies, if you're going to use those methodologies, you have to attach it to task-based language assessment and have to understand what task-based language assessment is. And that's another thing that you have to attach to your learning of methodologies. And of course, if you want to be a good business communication trainer, find out, you can do it on the internet, you can Google it. What is an assessment center? What happens at an assessment center? What is an in-tray task? What are all the different, and in today's world, we do assessment centers online. One of my clients that I've had for over 20 years, I've always had them as a client. That's my job with them. I do the assessment centers for their company. It's a very large international company, and we have over 5,000 people a year who apply for jobs. And how do we hire these people? Who do we invite? Who do we invite to the assessment center? It's a process of elimination and takes some time. And, I'm not the only one on the team. It's a team. We work together, but we know what we're looking for. We eliminate people, through a process of elimination, because we're leading them to that assessment center, where we will make the final decisions as to whether they get hired or not. But again, know your methodologies, know what happens at an assessment center, and know, very importantly, what task-based language assessment is, definitely. And as far as the workshop, well, these things can be learned. We can improve these things. I would be glad to have a workshop for you. This is no problem. But let me just say, a workshop is quite different than a webinar. Today, we're doing a webinar. We're talking heads. That's not a workshop, okay? We're doing a lot of information exchange here, talking, and this is learning as well. But a workshop means you've got to come with an open mind and willingness to learn and take some risk and participate. I never do workshops where people only do not show their face. I don't allow these people in my workshops. This is not, I won't allow it, okay? You've got to participate, show who you are, and speak up, okay? Because this is how we learn and take risk.
Okay,
Who's afraid to make a mistake?
Lord. There are 2 more questions, Shra. Let me go to the second one. The academia being different from corporate, how do we convince the professors and build a case to bring changes in courses and methodologies? This is not, I don't know.
I'm going to tell you that I am a risk taker. I come from a family of, I'm the youngest in my family. My oldest sister is a gynecologist. My oldest brother is an engineer. My other brother is a doctor as well, a medical doctor, and my sister is a lawyer. And I have to say that I was left with either becoming an accountant. I wasn't too many opportunities left for me and my family. And I didn't want to be that. I wanted to be something else, but I still didn't know what it was. And I have to say that when I really look, at, building a case for that, I had to learn to build a case in my family first. And that's that social capital, that socioeconomic thing that has a lot to do with it. But being a risk taker is important in answering this question, because some of us just keep with the status quo and just do what we're told. Not me. I knew that in order to change and do something and be a catalyst for change, I also had to change jobs. And I went to universities and corporations that allowed me to do that. I told them what my ideas were, and I got jobs because I'm just an idealistic person, but I had to go. I wanted to develop myself as a business communications trainer, and I made a good case, a good argument, and they hired me because I came with a concept as well. I knew what I wanted. You got to have concepts.
See, I can also answer this question because I joined the industry in 2003 when I knew nothing. I was basically an English teacher. And I learned a lot from my participants. Some of them literally used to say, you're not talking. I mean, you don't know what you're talking about. We can't afford to be polite with our clients. So the main thing which kept me going are two things. One is one is learning, keep changing, keep learning, one, and meeting the client and discussing with them. But here what she's talking about is, how do you convince colleges that this is important? So I think, just 1 second in this, I think it's for this, what you need to do is tell them to risk with a smaller group, prove that what your course, etc., is successful in getting jobs for the students. And then probably you will be able to convince. You just have to take a risk, as he says, jump in and do. I think this was Calcutta question. That
Can I just add one more point there?
Lalitha, I'd like to
time up, is it?
We need to now start closing.
We have just 5 minutes left, so we need to close, Ron. But there's one more question. I think...
in 2 minutes. Okay, yes. Just 2 minutes and we'll...
What type of English would you advise one to do as a teacher? That is the ones you mentioned, like English for media literacy, etc., etc. What type of English would you... It depends, I think, on your... Anyway, please, Ron, your question. What type of English would you advise one to do as a teacher?
It said that media literacy. And again, how do I know the difference between just a language teacher and a business communications trainer? It's media literacy, is how they really use technology within the training, within the learning process, how they put that course together, how they explain to me why they're using that technology, those apps, and what is going to come out of that, and how they're going to teach the students to work with that technology and those apps, and how that is connected to their development as a learner, the student, and how that connects to private industry, and then getting a job of the future. So media literacy we have to bring to the table as a business communication trainer, but we don't really need all that media literacy as a language trainer, because we can just work with a book if we want to, and that's okay too. I don't have anything against course book driven learning. That's also a methodology, but definitely a good, seasoned, experienced business communication trainer brings media literacy as a skill to the table.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you very much. I know this time is too short for the subject we have taken, but I think we found it interesting. Can I hand over to Dolon? Would you like to say something, Dolon?
Lalitha, what I'll just mention, Shweta, the feedback forms, will you be putting into the chat box?
I have
It's
done it.
great. So, Lalitha, before I hand it over to you for the closing, for the vote of thanks, I'll just let everyone know that do fill up the feedback forms. Those who are present in person, you will receive physical copies. And
Those are online.
What we will show you next is we have an upcoming event coming up in February. And if the topic of that event is going to be intercultural education and training, how to get started. And we would like to take it to the next level. We've had a fantastic opening with Ron today with a fireside chat. In the next one, ideally, we would even want to take it further into workshop mode. And then after that, what we would like to leave you with is a video. But before the video is displayed, I would personally like to thank Ron for your time, for the effort, for everything, for all the thought that you put into the session, the way you sort of owned it and carried it through with us. So, and Lalitha, thank you so much. But I will leave the final vote of thanks to you, Lalitha.
Ron, I'm really privileged. I'm so happy we had this fireside chat. You clarified so many concepts and you used your personal experience to explain each. I, for one, found that I could talk to you for another 3 hours. But knowing the time here, I don't think I also tend to get carried away. I'm really, really grateful. And we'll get back. Pune wanted something to know about workshop. If anyone is interested, I'll definitely get back to you. They'll get back to you. I'll share your email ID. And finally, I think we started off very well. And I think this is one of the highlights of BEC5's programs this year, that we've started off our fireside chat again. And I'm sure all the participants found it very, very useful. Thank you very much for giving your time and your expertise in sharing it with us. And I need to thank all the participants too for paying it. And if any of you have any questions, please share it with at a location or send it to info@bec5. I think I can send it to Ron later to just check, because right now we do not have so much of time. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you, your group. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and look forward to a little workshop.
Yes, you too hope to. Thank you very much.
And do watch the video for those who are not familiar with what BEC5 does.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure being with everyone this afternoon.
Thank you very much. And enjoy the meeting, face-to-face meeting, all of you.
Yes, Ron, we'll be missing you. We wish you were here with us for the meeting.
I'm also going to miss that because I'm not.
Yes, Lalitha, you too, the two main speakers. We'll be missing you.
Well, I am waiting for an invitation to come to India, and I will get on a plane and be there.
Oh, how nice. Yeah,
just to make you jealous, we are chat and chat.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.